So today we consider the wedding in Cana. There's some very interesting nuances built into this story. The story seems sort of obvious at first. I mean, it's just the story of a feast after a wedding. But one thing of significance is it's almost the most complete record we have of a wedding in the Bible. Couples come to me and they go, well, we really want a Christian wedding. And I said, I remember wanting one of those myself. And when I went and researched it, I wasn't really sure just what one of those amounted to. Because there just isn't any order of service. We think we've got Numbers and Deuteronomy and stuff in our Bibles, and of course they must detail every last thing about how this is done, but it's not so. There is no detail of a wedding, either Jewish or Christian, in the Bible. What we have is the detail of a feast after a wedding. So, as far as knowing what the bride should say, what the groom should say, we might have a sense of what the English Book of Common Prayer from the Anglican Church says in our heads, but that's not the Bible. That was something written up 400 years ago, and it's a beautiful service, but again, not the Bible. What do we have in the Bible? Well, we've got this wedding in Cana, and we have Paul advising that bishops should be the husband of only one wife, and that's about him. But there are other things to learn in this story of the wedding in Cana. Jesus was marked out as a miraculous kid from virtually the time of his birth. He gets visited by 3 wise men from afar. He's given gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. It's realized that he is in danger. He flees to Egypt. They bring him back. At 12 years old, he's in the temple, and he amazes the priests with his questions and puzzles and stuff like that. But he doesn't do any miracles for them. And it's not just an argument of omission that maybe he did a miracle and they didn't write it up. But this scripture specifically says that this was the first of Jesus' miracles. He'd been baptized, the sky opens up, some hear thunder, some hear the voice of God according to the word itself. No miracles performed by him. So, here we have the first of Jesus' miracles. The story describes the feast after the wedding. Now, betrothal happens before the feast. And in fact, betrothal is the ceremony we'd probably be most interested in if we were trying to figure out what the Christian rite of a wedding would read like, word by word, line by line, because the betrothal is the actual wedding. But the bride doesn't move in with the groom until after the public part. The betrothal isn't done in front of a congregation of people. The betrothal would be a much smaller family thing. But the feast, now that's for the whole community. And the feast is what we're focusing on here. We don't know when this couple was betrothed. It could have been last week. It could have been months ago. We just don't know. But now this is the feast. This is the public face of the couple to the community. This is the big introduction. So, the feast might not take place for a while, but it is supposed to be a feast. It's a big deal. It is such a big deal that if you could afford it, it would run a week. Various activities, but basically a feast every night. Now, obviously, at the price of weddings today, I have couples call here to the church and say, hey, I'd like to do my wedding there. I think we have very modest needs. Of course, I come from Las Vegas, where weddings are done for a profit. And So they call, and even at our modest rates, some get discouraged. And they go, well, it's all in what you want. If you want this big public occasion, there's some expense to that. You'll find that out if you hold it in your backyard and just buy hot dogs for 50. So I don't feel any need to apologize for our modest rates. But just as a wedding today that ran for a week would beggar most of us, a wedding then that ran for a week would beggar most of them. There's every reason to anticipate that this feast is a one-night deal. This was the modest version of the feast. And that plays into the story rather importantly. The scripture indicates, or at first reading you just go, oh, Mary and Jesus went to the wedding together. You can kind of see them in the pew next to each other listening to the vows. But again, that's a modern vision that we need to kind of set aside because the vows have already been said. The betrothal happened some other time. Jesus and Mary weren't sitting in the pew together, and in fact, they probably didn't even go together. Because we've got a mistake here. This word also tacked on to the end of these two phrases make us think that it's kind of one sentence, one idea. Mary was there and Jesus was invited also. But in fact, they're two different phrases. Mary was there. The original author put a conjunction in, so we did too. I mean, we're trying to be faithful translators. But this is a separate idea. And also, Jesus was invited. So Mary was already there. Jesus came as a guest. Mary was there apart from an invitation. Jesus was there because of an invitation. And I'm not indicating that Mary crashed the party. Mary, I believe, was working at the celebration, and Jesus was a guest. This was, the neighbor ladies were helping out with the feast. The feast was obviously everything the couple could afford, or the wine never would have run out in the first place. Mary is basically functioning in the role of the lady circle that was picked to help out with the wedding. That's also why Mary would know that the wine was running out, but it had not yet run out. The wine is running out, Jesus. Well, everybody would know that if it was because the guests weren't getting seconds or thirds, 23rds. Only she knew that. She had the insider perspective as one of the neighbor ladies helping out at the feast. And then Mary wants Jesus to do something about it. She isn't quite sure what the lad is capable of, I don't think, because he's never demonstrated a miracle, has he? Scripture itself says no. But she thinks that he can fix this. And it's important to her. Because what's about to happen is this new young couple, in the first night of their public face to their community, they are about to become embarrassed. So Mary's serving with the other women from the community, and there are servants there. When Jesus objects, and he says, don't know what this has to do with me, Mom. She doesn't overpower him or beat him down with an argument or do something like that. She simply says to the servants, do whatever he says. Now it's important that when she says to the servants, do whatever he says, the word there is servants. This is a society where slaves are common. if this was getting catered by a professional wedding caterer, the caterer would have slaves. Slaves are doulos. Servants are diakonos. So servants, and that's where we get our word for deacons. Servants are being asked to fill up the water jugs. So that sticks with the idea that Mary, a freed woman, is serving. Well, there's some guys there that are serving as well, and they are called upon to fill up the jugs. So we go back to the crisis. The wine is run out, and Mary wants a miracle. How do we know Mary wants a miracle? Because Jesus gives her an answer that indicates that Mary wants a miracle. He says, what does this to me? My hour has not yet come. Mary isn't just asking Jesus for a trip to the liquor store. Because he could have done that without this big brouhaha over whether his hour had come yet. And by the way, what is that hour? Same gospel, Gospel of John. Gospel of John, and Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, in the high priest's prayer, says, the hour has come. Glorify your Son, so that your Son may glorify you. That's the hour. That gives us another puzzle. If Jesus' hour is the hour in which he was sacrificed for the sake of all people, and Jesus objects to Mary, my hour hasn't come, how come he makes the wine? He's identified what the hour is. The hour is not yet, and yet he does it. Did he just cave in to Mom? Not a bad idea if you're a son, by the way. But did he just cave in? Or is there something else going on here? And if there's any gospel that means what it says what it means, it's Mark. If there's any gospel that has nuances and things tucked under and slipped into the side, it's John. So we can look for the subtle stuff in this story and know that we're on good firm ground to do that. So why does Jesus turn the water into wine? This sign might be a little hard for you to see in the photograph, but it says North Las Vegas 1 mile. It's a sign I got to see from time to time, as you can imagine, coming and going from Las Vegas. The scripture doesn't just come out and say, the reason Jesus made the wine anyway was because it was a sign. But it comments at the end, simply summarizing that Jesus did this, as in made the wine, water into wine, the first of his signs. So when I see a sign, it's because, one, I'm traveling. 2, I want to know I'm on the right road. And 3, that sign assures me that that's the case. Jesus made the water into wine, not because he wanted to give everybody wine now and forevermore. It was a one-night deal. It was a very discreet and specific action. But it was the first of his signs. What would a sign like that say? Jesus had some disciples already. He hadn't picked the 12 yet. But from the very moment of his baptism, some of John's disciples started tailing him, following him around. They even went to the wedding that he went to. Now, they might have crashed the party. I don't know. Jesus, if they had invitations. But Jesus turns the water into wine, and this is an assurance. This is a sign. I'm the right guy. You're following after the right one. Now, the next thing that John gives us is a little more subtle. simply tells them to fill it up, and when it's full, he says, now go take a ladle of this to the steward. Okay? So no magic words, no secret ingredients. He doesn't add some powder that makes it purple or frothy or fizzy or whatever wine should be. And in doing nothing like that, in not even saying so much as a prayer, Jesus is establishing something for those who could see it. There was no magic practiced. There's no magic ingredients, no magic words. He didn't even ask God to change it into something else. He simply filled it up, sent the first sample to the steward. Jesus was no Palestinian musician, of which there were many. In fact, he did something that he shouldn't have been able to do. See, if Jesus were only human, if he were even a great prophet, if he were Moses himself, Jesus wouldn't be able to turn water into wine. Such people might petition God to turn the water into wine. But John is telling us in this first of his signs that Jesus wasn't a man of God. He wasn't somebody important to God, to whom God would grant favor. Jesus did that which only God does. And he does it without saying anything about it. John's Gospel is one to be read by those who are ready to believe. And this is the first of the signs. So Jesus didn't ask for anything, but the change came about. He's no magician, no prophet, no lawgiver. Who else could do this thing? I think, let's sort of recap this story, given these new insights. Jesus' first sign was an act of mercy. I think that's awfully important. It's apparent from his response to Mary, he wasn't planning to go and show off that night. The wedding is a humble affair. There are no slaves filling up the buckets. There are no slaves serving the dishes. It's the local neighbor ladies that are kind of keeping the affair running along. It's some of the guys from around town who fill up the buckets, those jars with 20 and 30 gallons. It was running out of wine, probably the first and only night of the celebration. The couple was about to be shaken, and Jesus, at the behest of Mary, wasn't going to happen. The steward's given the water made into the wine. Now, the steward does, in fact, praise the wine, but is that really what the steward is doing in this story? When John composed this story and wrote out how it all came down, what was the key for the steward? Well, do you suppose the steward is the professional steward of the professional wedding caterers that are hired to do these weddings for several days in a row at vast expense? And we've already got the neighbor ladies working and the guys around town being servants, not slaves. And the steward is basically giving the bridegroom a head slap. You know, it's like, you dummy. You serve the good wine before they get drunk and the bad wine after they get drunk. You got it wrong. It is a brazen wine. But it's an interesting bit of the story. So, we have this rather humble head slap of a moment that steps in as an act of kindness. But you know what? That's not uncommon. As a matter of fact, that's the universal. This first of Jesus' signs says, I'm a kind person. They all are. Another story. Great crowd without anything to eat. Jesus' motivation is announced here. I have compassion for the crowd because they have been with me for 3 days and have had nothing to eat. He feeds them. This is the feeding of the 5,000. Why? Because he has compassion. Does he do it again the next day? No. Does he ever do it again? There's a 7,000 feeding on another occasion. Yes, but same motivation. A leper came begging to him. He says, you know what? I know you can make me clean. Moved with pity, it says. Motivation is again announced. Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him, and he was made clean. Why? Moved with pity. One guy. Were there lepers in the land after Jesus was crucified and ascended to the Father? Yes. Why? Because Jesus didn't heal them all. Why did he heal that one? Because he was moved with pity. Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching and proclaiming the good news, curing every disease and sickness. He had compassion on them. That's why he was doing that. Because they were harassed. Another story. Jesus is approaching the town of Nain. Out comes a funeral procession. The guy in the bier here is a widow's only son. No husband, only son, gone. No social security system. She had a lot to cry about. Her future was pretty dark. When the Lord saw her, he had compassion for her and said, do not weep. He raises the dead. Always the motive is the same. The Pharisees come along one day and they say, we want a sign. Nothing will please us more than to follow you, Jesus. Let's have a sign. And Jesus says, no chance. Not a possibility. Gets in the boat and goes to the other side. Signs were never dished up because they were asked for. They weren't even dished up necessarily because they were needed. These guys needed a sign. It might have been interesting to see what would have happened if Jesus had given them a sign. But these are not people that move Jesus with compassion. No sign was given. So, Jesus did this, the first of his signs, this changing water into wine and came. Signs are of invaluable use to us. I don't think there's a soul here who has neither a GPS nor a map in their entire car. Signs, knowing where we're going to, is of great importance. You know who signs are useless for? People who aren't going anywhere. But we are on a spiritual journey. We need the signs. Jesus gave this first one out of compassion. Jesus gave the whole world a sign that day. The question is for us, each of us this morning, is it a sign for us? Is this a sign for me? The story of Jesus turning water into wine at a wedding 2,000 years ago on the other side of the whole planet? I hope so. I hope it's a sign that says to us, when we are dealing with God, we can count on a God who is kind and compassionate. That's the only reason any sign was ever given. We need to decide then to embrace this sign for ourselves, or if it's only a sign for somebody else. Are we going somewhere? Do we have a destination? If so, let us follow the signs, just as the disciples did. The response of the disciples was to believe. That's our option here as well. We can do as those who first witnessed the sign. Follow